Шановні колеги, будемо продовжувати.
Dear colleagues, we continue the working day in our crisis media center, and now we have the topic results of the third hearings of the civil society platform Ukraine-EU. We have Mr. Grygoriy, Osovyi, head of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. We have Mr. Alfredas Jonuska, member of European Economic and Social Committee, Director General of Trade and Industry and Craft Chamber of Siauliai. We have Ms. Yulia Tyschenko, head of the board, Ukrainian Center for Independent Political Research. We have Ms. Ulrika Westerlund, member of European Economic and Social Committee, Union for the Rights of Sexual Minorities, TGEU, and Vasyl Andreev, head of the Trade Union of Workers of Construction and Construction Materials Industry. Mr. Andreev will speak the first. I would like to speak today about the platform. We are not so often visible in mass media, but this is a platform which unites the civil society organizations of the third sector, also trade union organizations and employers organizations, and also, we have a partner, the European Social and Economic Committee. We have 6 working groups in different areas, as it is provided by major chapters of the association agreement, and also in different sectors of the economy. The work of our platform goes on transparently, democratically, and is based on principles and our major function is to monitor the Ukraine-EU agreement, assessment of the implementation process, review of the alternative ways of implementation, and also function to choose the better ways based on the objectives. Thus, all the parties are interested in doing our work efficiently and effectively through the period of time between our first meeting and now we had the third hearings. We reviewed the most topical issues, which we believed were the top priorities for reforming process in Ukraine. Thus, yesterday and today we had the hearings of our platform. We reviewed 2 reports presented by both sides devoted to labor market and regulation of labor market. We analyzed common features and differences between the EU and Ukraine, and also response of our societies to the labor market regulation. The second report was devoted to the rights of minorities, rights of vulnerable groups in Ukraine, and at the end of the report we provided recommendations to the parliament and to society at large, which we believe should be implemented. In result of our discussions, we had produced the final document based on the consensus of both sides of our platform, where we assessed the situation with the association agreement implementation. as of today. Also, we produced our recommendations and provided our colleagues with our vision how to finalize the association agreement ratification period in the EU. Specifically in the view of the Netherlands' position. This is one of the biggest concerns for our civil society. And also we discussed the visa-free regime and the pace or time frames, how it should, when it should be granted, whether it would be granted, and since we complied with all the conditions, we hope that this regime will be granted to Ukraine. During this 2 days and in the previous hour sessions, our work was rather fruitful. By the way, we never limit our meetings to only bilateral sessions. We quite often organize meetings with participation of some local authorities and with central executive bodies in some specific areas, like Vice Prime Minister on European and Atlantic and North Atlantic integration, Ms. Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze. With this, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jonuska.
First, I want to thank our colleagues from Ukrainian side for the well-organized meeting in Kiev. We organizing the meetings twice per year. First working meeting was half a year ago in Brussels, and today and yesterday we had the meeting in Kiev. I want to explain a little bit about the European Economic Social Committee. What is it? I can say that we have the 344 members from different European organizations, from the third parties, the employers organization, third part trade unions, and third part from NGOs. So we produces the opinions for the our Commission, for the European institutions, because we have a lot of work to produce opinion, because our governments want to know the opinion of civil society. We like the voice from the society to say this law, the regulation or directive will be good for us or will be not. So and by the association agreement between EU and Ukraine was established the platform. Ukraine Civil Society Platform, 15 members from our committee and 15 members from the Ukraine organizations, and we have the platform, the field to discuss about the main issues, what will be implemented in the integration process, Ukraine integration process in the EU. So I think we work very, very hard, because we have a different point of views, but in the discussions we finding the main and common solutions and preparing the declarations. I want to mention that in the first meeting half a year ago, we prepared two reports. One was about the energy security, another one about the corruption things. These days we discussed on other issues. We discuss on labor market regulation in the EU and Ukraine, common features and differences, adaptation of the Ukraine labor legislation to EU legislation. And another report was prepared by two reporters, one from the Ukraine side, another from the our committee side, anti-discrimination legislation, practice, rights and of vulnerable groups in the context of the association agreement. I think these issues, these titles and topics are very important for the both sides, and we put the conclusions and the results in our joint declaration, which was adopted by all the members of the civil society platform, because we are not voted. We by the consensus approve the document, articles or points of view. So I guess that this joint declaration will be useful for the Ukrainian side to show to the government, to the ministries, to the other authorities, which way is the best for the civil society to organize economical and social life in the Ukraine. So we also discuss about the war in the Ukraine, in the east of Ukraine, and the situation in Crimea. We express the unequivocal support for the sovereignty of territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders and condemn the Russian aggression. So for us, it's very painful thing. The war in the Europe is the worst thing what happened in the Europe. So also we regret the negative result of the Dutch referendum on the ratification of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. I think this question will be solved in the near future, and maybe we'll discuss in the next hour meeting about this. Also, we welcome the full implementation of the criteria of visa liberalization and other things. I think this, about why I'm talking, is about the implementation, the articles of the association agreement. But these topics and other reports, I think will explain our colleagues which prepared reports. Thank you very much.
Дякую, пане Альфредас. До слова запрошується пані Ulrika Westerlund.
So I invite Ms. Ulrika Westerlund to the microphone.
This opportunity. I drafted the EU side report on anti-discrimination legislation and practice after we had the pre-discussion with the Ukrainian part on which vulnerable groups to focus on in our respective reports, and decided to focus a bit on the situation for ethnic minorities, Roma people, indigenous peoples, LGBTI people, people living with disabilities in Ukraine. So I looked at the EU legislation that is mentioned in the Annex 40 to the Chapter 21 of this association agreement, and then compared it to the Ukrainian legislation. So we could see some in fact, advantages or like better things in the Ukrainian legislation. So I also tried to make that clear in the report that it's not always the EU that is the best. It's you have covered education, for example, in your anti-discrimination legislation, which is a very positive aspect, because in the European Union, not all grounds of discrimination covers education, which has been mentioned a lot as a problem. In the anti-discrimination legislation in Ukraine, as I'm sure you're all aware, a problem is that not all grounds are covered explicitly. It's an open list, but it's not explicit mentioning of sexual orientation and gender identity. So that is something that should be looked on. And this includes also the work on the new labor code of Ukraine. It's the same challenge. It was interesting work to look into the national strategy of human rights of Ukraine, and also the action plan, which is extremely ambitious, with lots of decided actions to take on how to implement the national strategy on human rights. And I also tried to look into comments from civil society of Ukraine to see how this has worked in practice. And for example, you can then say that a large gathering of LGBT groups of Ukraine have noted the many different actions in the plan that relate to LGBTI rights, but they have not been implemented so far. So that is a critique. But there are plenty of content to the action plan that is very good and concrete. So those are some of the things in this report. You could say that my report focused maybe more on different assessment documentations, reports that have been made, for example, during the visa liberalization process. And the Ukrainian side report focused a lot on discussing the situation for the different groups, so they complemented each other quite well. In this draft joint declaration that we made today, there are a number of mentions in this about the topics that I just said, about the labor code and the action plan and the national strategy on human rights, and also then what should be addressed further. One suggestion that we had was that the Commissioner on Human Rights of Ukraine should be given the possibility to be part of the European network of equality bodies called Equinet. And that is something that has been raised many times. And it's also a wish from the Ukrainian side themselves. So those are some of the things that we discussed today. Thank you.
Дякую вам. До слова запрошується пані Юлія Tyschenko.
Thank you very much. I invite Ms. Yulia Tyschenko to the microphone. Good afternoon. I would like to thank to the previous speakers, and I thank to Ulrika for the rather high assessment of Ukrainian anti-discrimination legislation. But without going into much details, I would say that the practical implementation is not very perfect in terms of minorities first, national minorities, and even in terms of education. Unfortunately, we do not manage to preserve the balance between the state language and the minority languages. This has been remaining a long-standing issue from 2010, but it is not resolved till now. All those things limit the right of ethnic minorities to education and their native languages. Like Hungarian, Crimean Tatar, Romanian languages may become may suffer because of the distorted situation and distorted relations between the Ukrainian and Russian languages in Ukraine. Also, the situation with the legislation and languages not often correspond to the real situation with violation of rights and with real discrimination of people. And we had experts and members from the gender organizations, LGBT community, Roma people, representatives of other vulnerable groups who witnessed about discrimination, especially the cases of discrimination and all sorts of violations after occupation of some Ukrainian territories. Unfortunately, we have no impact on what's going on with violation of Crimean Tatars in Crimea. We cannot stop this. Nevertheless, we appreciate very much the reports of the European Parliament, two reports that reflected the real situation. The first was issued on February 12th, and the second was published on May 12th this year. I am very grateful to our platform, which presented recommendations as to the improving the situation with the rights of indigenous people and ethnic minorities, drafting those resolutions, we tried to understand the situation with anti-discrimination legislation, understand the aspects which are not directly dealing with discrimination legislation, but which may result in discrimination. Actually, for example, people with disabilities, the employment of those people, the construction norms which prevent people with disabilities from access to some premises, for example, or the rights of women and gender inequality due to some norms which at a first glance do not seem to deal with gender, etc. But actually they worsen the situation. As for the LGBT community, we welcome changes in the labor code which created better precautions for discrimination based on sexual orientation. But application or implementation of some pieces of legislation sometimes influences harmfully the rights of those people. For example, the right to peaceful assembly and the rules how the peaceful assembly should be held, they sometimes negatively influence the rights of LGBT community for non-discrimination. Also, there are some possibilities for discrimination of such new group, such new vulnerable group as IDPs. The way how these people should be registered quite often discriminates them in the hosting communities, like employment issues and coexistence issues. Quite often for these people, it's hard, and they experience this discrimination. In Ukraine, we do not have manifestations of systemic discriminations as to the ethnic minorities. But the law about ethnic minorities, which was passed back in 1991, it requires some brushing up, some revival to review it against today's conditions, although we do not have systemic violations, but the situation maybe in reality is not brilliant. Now coming to Roma people. The analysis of the strategy as to Roma people at the state level demonstrates either bureaucratic approach or insufficiency of the measures which are planned, or maybe insufficient communication with the Roma community. We found out that this is a challenge for us. Quite often, negligence in Roma issue results in discrimination. Sometimes people tend to interpret some actions as violation of their rights, or do not notice when the rights are really violated. Last year, people with disabilities proved that they were discriminated when it this was about access to some places. But in general, civil society and law enforcement agencies have a deficit of knowledge, have a deficit of awareness about violation of human rights, about, for example, and also lack knowledge about crimes against humanities. They do not have simply this background knowledge how that should be documented, how discrimination should be documented in order to file cases to court at later stage. Also, the issue of positive action as to the vulnerable groups. The state should follow this policy of positive action, which allows to reach real equality in society. Of course, I do not wish to say that nothing is being done. We wish to see the draft law entered by the government number 3051. That draft law, which is very much needed, won't go to the parliamentary session room this week or very soon because of their very tough schedule. This draft law would be able to mitigate some challenges and strengthen our opportunity to counteract discrimination. Now I invite Mr. Vasyl Andreev.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I would like to say that our platform is one of legal instruments of association that is established by the agreement, and our platform of civil society in its documents and reports we prepare 2 times a year. We highlight the most important problems in different sectors of public life and agenda of association agreement. And one of these reports this year, this half year, was a report on labor in Ukraine, labor market in Ukraine, and adaptation of Ukrainian legislation to EU norms. And I would like to inform you on some aspects that were envisaged in the final resolution of our meeting, of our platform, concerning labor market, employment, salary, concerning inclusion of the market and social dialogue, and capabilities for inspection and verification. And if we are speaking about such an indicator as employment, we have 9.4% of unemployment in Ukraine, and our market is in poor condition now. We can compare this figure. It is, and in Europe, the figure is mainly the same. But people address, and they only each fourth of people who want to be employed are registered in the employment service. So we may get those terrible figures, those terrible indicators. Only 1/3 of people who are able to work now pay social contributions, and these people won't be able to get proper pensions and to use the system of social security. Concerning salary, the level of minimal salary that is less than 30% of the salary declared by the European Parliament, a minimum 60%, and we are speaking that the minimal salary in Ukraine does not play its role concerning support of vulnerable groups, and many people who work are poor. The average salary in the European Union is 10 times more than in Ukraine. Of course, we may say about the parity of purchasability, but you know that there were some protests of trade unions in the summer, and people, they cannot pay their bills, the communal services bills, and that's why people demand that this the minimal salaries should be increased, and this will lead to the fact that the salary should be increased. And we told about that in Ukraine the population is on decline, and we continue to lose people, and according to the estimates of IMF, we will have lower figures this year, and we are in the weak position, and we lose people, those who can work in Ukraine, and migration also is on the rise. A lot of people fled our country as migrants, and half of them left to European Union, and through different estimates they say that these people will never go back. Also people people after 54 years, when people reach the sea level, and also people who have some sort of disabilities, they also have the problems in the labor market, and these are vulnerable categories of people, and they should be supported. And also the members of our working group, the fourth group that prepared this report, told about the problems in the labor market and social dialogue, the importance of the social dialogue, the participation of all stakeholders in the process that is envisaged in the framework of the mechanisms of social dialogue. And we saw in the Ministry of Social Support that they are ready to discuss the documents and to discuss the conclusions of the resolution after our yesterday's meeting, and we welcome their decision. And ending my report, I would say that together with the Office of International Organization of Labor, that now has the project to improve the inspection and adherence of legislation and secure conditions for employees and safe environment of work. We believe that the state should change its attitude, and it should provide inspectors with the ability to verify the working conditions directly at the enterprises, and they should be they can have these verification. They should have these verifications. These conventions, they are of priority, and they should be implemented in our country. And the last point that were mentioned by our colleagues is that there is some in Ukraine we have 12 laws concerning prohibition of strikes, and also the articles of the law on resolution of disputes and strikes in case there is a threat to a person's life. And all these 5 points were discussed in detail, and decisions were taken. And the report on labor market in 2 languages will be made public and will be also published. Please address everyone who wants to get this information. You can address our site where this information is going to be placed. So if you don't have any other comments, maybe we will have questions from the audience. Do you have questions? Please introduce yourself first. Good afternoon, Andreev Megel, Liberalism Institute. We discussed the issue of minimal salary, and they say it should be 3,200 hryvnias. Did you discuss these issues, and what are the views on this? Because you know that this issue is widely discussed within the ministries. Unfortunately, we were not able to hear about the opinion of the Deputy Minister of Finance, and they said that there should be a proper sum of money allocated for this minimal salary, but it is not about the raise of all the salaries at once. This is the minimum level that should be earned by a person in order to for the person to just survive, and the minimum salary should influence on the level of life for these people, and no one is obliged to raise this minimal salary, but just one click by presenting this draft law, and the capabilities of trade unions will increase in the process of negotiation with the employers. What level of the salary, of the minimal salary, is enough? And the number of people who work in the shadow sector is about 6 million people. 6 million of people. This is to the population of two Lithuania or any other European countries. So these people do not pay single social contribution, and their salary is not secure. So the minimum salary is some sort of a benchmark, and also for trade unions, this is an instrument of negotiation in order to fairly distribute social and product. So this was an initiative of the government. They carried out negotiation with the previous government in the framework of trilateral council, and the establishment of the minimal salary at the level of objectively calculated minimum is the obligation of the state. It should provide guarantees, social guarantees, to those who work. This is the norm for any European country, to pay for employment, for work, and this should be clearly established in order that the person should meet his basic physiological needs. I even don't say that European Charter also focuses its attention that the minimum should be enough in order to support not only the employee, but also his dependents. And now in Ukraine they solve only first question, just to secure the person who works from poverty, and this it corresponds to the strategy envisaged by the documents of UNO to reduce poverty. Ukraine adhered to the document, and also the trade unions support this initiative. Moreover, they support this publicly, and they also strike before Supreme Council when the draft law will be considered, and they will support this social guarantees. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Please introduce yourself first. Alexei Pedruni, Trade Union News. Question to all the speakers. What are the main problems that prevent Ukraine in European processes in the process of European integration.
So I'll say what concerns and these topics which you discussed before, and thank you very much for the question. I think all of us know that Ukraine is facing both economic and social crisis since the start of the war in the east and the occupation of Crimea. And I want to mention some figures that we know that GDP declined in 2015 approximately 12%, and unemployment was about 9% in 2015, and 33% unemployment between young people. So it's very big, and wages of course dropped in quarter 2015, and then more than 200% rises the prices for the gas, and so it's economical big problems which faces the Ukraine. But I want to mention about these things that what Ukraine can do. I think the EU has provided an unprecedented support package to Ukraine in the amount of 11 billion euros, including 365 million euros for special measures, and for civil society program support 10 million too. So I think it's necessary to use this money for the preparing and implementing reforms that the result could be sustainable growth economy of Ukraine. Then we will find the money for the wages, for the salaries, and other things. So I think also we need to when we implement reforms, and in the process of implementation of reforms, of course we need to sign the free trade agreement between, and you, like Ukraine, need to open the market in the world to the Europe. Of course, I'm the employer from employer organization. I'm saying that also the employers, the businesses could prepare themselves for the going to the Europe market, to transforming the technologies and other things, that the goods would be compatible with the Europeans. And but I mentioned that, and the level for the goods, the prices for the goods will be in the higher level than now. Then it will be the bigger money for the all social need to Ukraine. So.
Дякую, колеги. Тут мені підказують, що на цій ноті маємо завершувати. Час підтискає. Дякую вам.
So the time is over till the next time. Goodbye.
Шановні колеги, наступна подія о 16:30.